When it comes to rounding up American citizens, Donald is getting increasingly adept, and he has found a way to expand the number of Americans he is targeting. Now it's the unhoused. On July 25th, he signed an executive order that effectively criminalizes homelessness. The very next day, he bragged about it on the White House lawn during yet another copter talk. Remember that? When he talks to a gaggle of press while the helicopter is standing nearby waiting for him to get into it so nobody can really hear what he has to say. Take a look.
Right after this, just get rid of that. If you do that, the particularly what you can do, you talk with America all the time. Something you gotta get rid of it. You can't have it. When the leaders come to you to make a change in positions with fingers and even criminal fatalities, and we're turning in the tents outside of the White House, we're going after them. And everything was something down like that. You want to keep it tight.
Oh, no, we cannot sully Donald's view from the White House, can we? So what would be an incredibly effective and in the long run, probably economically sound way, and certainly a way that would be better for us as a society to handle the very serious problem of homelessness? Let's see, what could you do? Yes, you could increase the amount of affordable housing. That's one thing we could do. We could increase access to mental health services for people who are struggling, right? We could do both of those things. And again, I think in the long run, that would benefit us in many ways as a society. Instead, Donald's executive order gives local authorities broad powers to remove unhoused people forcibly from public spaces and ship them off to quote unquote treatment or rehabilitation centers, even without their consent. Because apparently now unhoused people don't have any constitutional rights either. According to CNN, quote, the order directs Attorney General Pam Bondi to reverse judicial precedents and end consent decrees that limit jurisdictions' abilities to relocate homeless people. It also redirects federal resources so that affected homeless people are transferred to rehabilitation and substance misuse facilities. This means that Donald is ordering the DOJ to roll back decades of legal protections that keep local governments from rounding up unhoused people en masse and forcing them into institutions without their consent. In other words, treating them like criminals. What happens then when some of those mental health facilities are already full or mental health facilities and shelters become full? What are we going to do with the unhoused who, according to Donald and those in his orbit, consider a blight on our society? Well, people like the little Nazi Stephen Miller probably have ideas about what to do. Almost certainly, the unhoused will then be sent to pre-existing gulags like the one in the Everglades, or our taxpayer dollars are going to be spent building new concentration camps, which, let's be clear, is essentially de facto what these kinds of places are. If you are sent to such a place simply because of who you are or your condition, if you haven't committed a crime, if you have not been granted your due process, you are being illegally detained at a facility where you don't belong. Now, this is not always the case, but in many cases, people are unhoused because they suffer from mental health disorders. Suffice it to say that being unhoused is a very stressful way to live. Most people under such circumstances do not know where their next meal is going to come from. They do not know where they're going to sleep that next night. However, imagine how much more stressful it would be to be taken to a completely alien environment where you know nobody, where you have no rights, and you are being held against your will. That, I believe, would be infinitely more stressful. There's more. Quote, the executive order also directs Bondi to work with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Scott Turner, and Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy to fast-track federal funding to states and municipalities that crack down on, quote, open illicit drug use, urban camping and loitering, and urban squatting, and track the location of sex offenders, unquote, unquote. So if Donald, first of all, were truly concerned about getting sex offenders off the streets, then maybe he would turn himself in. This whole thing is yet another classic Donald maneuver. First, there's the performative law and order bullshit instead of providing actual solutions to a real problem. Then, of course, there's the scapegoating and othering of a vulnerable group in this country. And in this instance, like many other things that are happening right now, it's to distract from Donald's massive failures on a global scale vis-a-vis his insane tariffs, and of course, the fact that he is at the center of the Epstein Files scandal that is entirely of his own making. Finally, a huge goal behind much of this, as with the immigration ICE raids, is to create media-friendly cruelty to feed the base. None of this has anything to do with crafting actual policy that will make the American people safer or healthier. According to the Washington Post, quote, Donald's executive order could increase hospitalization of homeless individuals with mental health and substance use disorders. Okay, I mean, that to you might sound like a good thing, but again, that is a judgment call that people in the federal government have no right to make. Despite the administration's claim that this is a step to end homelessness, advocates for the unhoused who studied this issue extensively, unlike Donald Trump or anybody in the executive branch, say that this will only make the problem worse. The National Homelessness Law Center spoke out saying, quote, this executive order is rooted in racist, outdated myths about homelessness and will undoubtedly make homelessness worse, unquote. The statement goes on to say, quote, sadly but not surprisingly, Donald continues to focus on deeply unpopular policies like handcuffs in jail, which hurt Black and brown people most. Laws and budgets that make homelessness and poverty worse negatively impact us all. To build a truly safe, healthy, and just community, we need housing and healthcare, not handcuffs and budget cuts, unquote. Once again, Donald is choosing optics over real results. Why? Because he does not actually care about the foundational problem. Anything he can do to further harm Black and brown people, he will do. Before we go on, we here at Mary Trump Media are determined to hold Donald accountable for his misuse of government force. So please like and share this video. And if you believe in our mission, subscribe to our channel. It is critical to understand the history of homelessness in America in order to put into context just how egregiously irresponsible Donald's executive order actually is. Donald's executive order, first of all, is based on a fundamental lie, and that is that homelessness is caused by mental illness or drug use alone, and that the only solution here is to institutionalize those who are homeless. But the history of institutionalization in America proves just the opposite. Here's some reporting from LA Times that did a deep dive into all of this. So we're going to break down our history of institutionalization and the reasons why it does not work in combating the very serious and seemingly entrenched problem of homelessness in this country. The United States first funded public psychiatric hospitals in 1833, aiming to provide humane treatment for people with serious mental illness. But by the mid-20th century, these hospitals were overcrowded, underfunded, and abusive. Think movies like The Snake Pit or the documentary Titicut Follies. Patients were neglected, mistreated, and confined for life with little or no path to recovery. New psychiatric medications, psychotropic drugs, were developed in the 1950s and 60s, along with the increasing civil rights concerns vis-a-vis the mentally ill, which fueled a national push for deinstitutionalization. The 1963 Community Mental Health Act was supposed to replace large institutions with local community-based treatment centers, but of course, funding has never matched the need. The result has been that patients were discharged to their families, many of whom were seriously unequipped to care for them, or they were released into communities with no real mental health infrastructure. Thousands ended up incarcerated or homeless, creating the very cycle we continue to grapple with today. Here's a key fact. While mental illness is indeed a factor for some, but most people with severe mental illness are not homeless. Study after study, including research from the National Law Center for Homelessness and Poverty, show that the number one cause for homelessness is lack of affordable housing. Institutionalization doesn't fix homelessness. It just makes people who are unhoused disappear. And it stigmatizes the problem of homelessness. Karis Myrick, mental health advocate and former LA County mental health leader, explained it quite concisely. Quote, homelessness is not a medical condition that needs treatment. It's a social infrastructure problem that needs transformation, unquote. And this is one of those issues, the solution for which is so glaringly obvious. It makes me wonder why we are still here at a place in our history where the one person who could actually do something about it is the one person who is determined to make it worse. Regina LaBelle, the director of the Addiction and Public Policy Initiative at Georgetown University Law Center and a former drug policy official in the Biden White House, told the Washington Post, quote, there's no question we need to do more to address both homelessness and untreated substance use disorder and mental health conditions in the U.S. But issuing an executive order while disinvesting in treatment and other funding that will help prevent homelessness and untreated health conditions will do nothing to address the fundamental issues facing the country, unquote. It's clear just how hypocritical it is to sign this executive order while gutting resources for low-income people in this country. In other words, by doing so, Donald Trump is essentially going to worsen the problem of homelessness in America. Jennifer Mathis, deputy director of the Judge David L. Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law, agreed with these sentiments and called out the detrimental policies that Donald was pushing, saying, quote, at a time when the federal government is making historic cuts to Medicaid services and housing, no state can afford to warehouse people with disabilities in costly institutions. Locking up more people is not a solution, unquote. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not a new problem. As I said earlier, it is mystifying to me that this is a problem that has not been addressed more seriously in the past, especially by Democratic administrations. We need more public housing in this country. We need more affordable housing in this country. We need a better safety net for more people in this country. There should be no such thing as the quote unquote working poor in the richest country in the history of the planet. That is an obscenity to me. Anybody who is working should never face the prospect of losing their home. Anybody with a disability, whether it's a physical one or a mental one, should ever face the possibility of homelessness in this country. Anybody who is a veteran, who has served this country, should ever face the possibility of homelessness in this country. In fact, no citizen, no person on American soil should ever face the issue of homelessness in this country. And Donald Trump is going to make that possibility much, much, much more likely, because just as with his immigration policies, these are as cruel as you can possibly imagine, and they will, as always, make things much worse than you can possibly imagine. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating, because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.